Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to The Deal. I'm your host, Jason Kelly, here with Alex Rodriguez. Well, sort of here. We're going to get to an interview with your good buddy, Alex, Kevin Burkhardt, your partner at Fox Sports. That's coming up later in the episode. But first, our listeners are going to be so excited. One of the things we love about this format that we're doing is it's wherever we are at any given moment. I happen to be in New York. You're in Paris, and you are, at least based on Instagram, having the time of your life, seeing everybody who seems to be there. I've got a lot of FOMO. So I want to talk to you about it before we get to KB. I mean, tell me what it's like on the ground. It feels like, as the kids would say, it feels like a vibe.
Jason, you would have loved it. I thought about you a lot. If you think about Paris, look, it needed a big comeback. Let's be clear. Brazil was a little bit of a flop. Japan, obviously, you have the built-in excuse with COVID in 2020. But this was a perfect storm, and you needed big numbers, and his hats delivered in an enormous way. But just walking around, even last night, Jason, in Paris, what a perfect canvas. I mean, on one end, you have it anchored by the Eiffel Tower. The other one, you have the Louvre. You have all the arches, the shopping, entertainment district, and it's high fashion capital of the world.
Right.
And then the sports. It was awesome.
Yeah, I mean, money and sports colliding in a really massive way. As you say, all the luxury brands are very much on display. The city has put on quite a show by all accounts. And I don't want to get too far past your point and really underscore it. The Olympics needed this. It was really on the downslope. I think people are now looking ahead to LA. And I think you would agree, LA's got some big shoes to fill coming off of Paris.
They do. And look, Paris, to me, is one of the big winners here. I mean, they did an outstanding job of being gracious, hostess, all the French people. They made you feel at home. If you look at some of the revenue numbers, $1.2 billion for Comcast and Peacock, who absolutely crushed it. And you have 41 million people watching the opening night where LeBron had the big flag, the U.S. flag. And look, in a time where the world is so divided, our country's so divided, you can actually have a flag and be non-controversial, which was really nice.
Yeah.
But people around the world were very respectful to each other. And that's the special place that we have in sports. That's why we do our podcast, because we do like to educate, share our experiences, but also bring people together.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really glad you said that. And as you say, you know, sports is this commonality. And it's fascinating to me to look at those numbers that you mentioned, the viewership numbers. I have to think, as someone who is an owner of a couple of basketball teams, it's very reinforcing to you to see live sports still rates. I mean, people have been tuning in at work. They've been tuning, you know, the afternoon, like you walk around, I won't say Bloomberg, but you walk around another office and you see people like they're watching the Olympics and then they're watching it again at night. So the pull of live sports is very real when it comes to actually keeping people watching. So I want to ask you, what did you watch? What have you been to see? I know you've seen, you know, some of the players who play for the Wolves and the Lynx. Tell me what you've been looking at.
I mean, the big time game was France beating Canada in a huge upset right before U.S. beat Brazil, which was a bit of a dud. It was over probably in the middle of the first quarter.
Yeah.
But you think about it, in what, other than the Olympics, can you have the best players in the world in basketball have 4 games in one venue, and you clear out and you come back in?
God.
And you know what, Jason? Just pivoting to U.S. basketball, this is probably the best team since '92, the original Dream Team. But they have the whole trifecta working when you look at talent, coaching, and chemistry. Steve Kerr and his staff are just doing a fantastic job.
Yeah, it's a great moment for the business of basketball, it seems, because to your point, I'm glad we're talking about this, because what you're seeing is that obviously the NBA via Team USA is a massive business. But then you look around, there are a bunch of NBA superstars playing for their home countries. And so you're getting these amazing, you know, rivalries that you normally only see in the NBA season on the world's biggest stage. And that is just a testament to how fast this game is growing, owing to the efforts of Adam Silver and others who see this global growth as the real future of the NBA.
You know, I had a chance to see 3 of our players yesterday. We had Rudy Gobert playing for France, who's got a little bit of a jam finger, Nickeil Alexander-Walker playing for Canada, and of course, Anthony Edwards. But there's a look in their face that usually you only get to see either in the finals or a Game 7 or a Super Bowl.
Yeah.
There is an importance, there's a pride, there's an electricity in the building that you see no other place but the Olympics.
I mean, obviously, you're there in a number of different capacities, in addition to all the other business interests you have. I mean, does it feel like deals are getting done on the sidelines? I mean, obviously, we're going to have some stars come out of this who are going to get big endorsements, but is there a feel of like there is at a Super Bowl or a U.S. Open or an NBA Finals that like the big hitters are there and they're talking shop?
Absolutely. Everybody's there. I mean, you name it, they're there. Obviously, the king of France, when you think about LVMH and Bernardo Arnault, I mean, they run that town. Think about him as you think of Steve Jobs back in the day, or even an Elon Musk today, Mark Zuckerberg. The way they imprint their power of that brand, and obviously they're a very global brand. But the other thing that I saw, the big winners for me, and one kind of semi-loser, the big winner was NBC Comcast.
Yeah.
They've had an incredible quarter. I mean, if you think about just what happens over the last few months, telecast of the British Open, obviously, the big announcement on an 11-year deal where they'll be paying the NBA $2.5 billion, according to public reports. And then these Olympics, they put on a masterclass. Peacock has really showed off. The way they've telecasted has just been really great. And the numbers, again, 41 million people watching, already 1.2 billion in ad sales. And I think now is poised and set up for the next Olympics in LA. There's a lot of chatter on TNT, NBC, Nike. They're a big sponsor. The word on the street was how heavy-handed Nike was. And disclaimer, I wore Nike my whole career. I did my deal with Phil Knight. I love Nike. But look, they're at an inflection point, right? They're now into their fourth CEO. Their stock is down 70% from the all-time high. They've cut marketing by 70%, and they're still doing $4 billion in marketing. But the silver lining for them is they made a big, big bet in this Olympics. They are hoping that next quarter, things start trending in the right direction again.
Yeah, I'm sure like as an athlete, you're like so jazzed up seeing these people at their absolute peak and relating to that. But as a business person, what are you taking away? Like, what are the things you and I are going to be talking about when you get back to the U.S. as we continue the show? Who are the people? What are the interesting trends that you're seeing that we should be thinking about?
I think that sports is here to stay. If you think about it, Jason, sports and live sports is the only thing that alter human behavior as far as scheduling. People will schedule their day around their big game, their team playing. There's no other thing that does that besides live music or live sports.
All right. Has there been a surprising sport that you watched where you're like, I hadn't really seen this before, but just like lit you up?
The most impressive venue for me was beach volleyball, which the backdrop was the Eiffel Tower. It was one of the most incredible scenes and hottest tickets. I thought the 3-on-3 is a pretty cool concept because it's a little bit like pickleball is to tennis, 3-on-3 is to basketball. Like for older guys like me, I actually like half court and I also like pickleball. That was interesting. To me, Jason, the biggest lost opportunity was Major League Baseball not being here. And if you think about it, if the goal is to get younger, get more global, show off your biggest and shiny stars like Aaron Judge, Shohei Ohtani, Juan Soto, Garrett Cole, these guys should be here. And if you think about it, what a great time in 24 and 28, Paris and LA, to pilot. Maybe you shorten the season to 110 games. You take a page out of the WNBA, have your U.S. Olympic team go up against the rest of the stars. That should have been the All-Star game just a month ago. And then if you fast forward to LA, do it again. Let's see how the season looks for 110 games. Make it 4 months, prolong the postseason from 1 month to 2, much like the NBA, and give it a rip. And it only happens, once every 4 years. Imagine a home run derby kind of going into the tower. It was just perfect. And it made me really sad with all these sports that my favorite sport is not represented in the biggest venue in the world.
All right. Well, I am so excited for you to come back. Tell me more stories. Thank you for taking some time to weigh in on this. It's the perfect segue, especially talking about all this media, into our interview with Kevin Burkhardt. Thanks, partner.
You got it.
All right, Alex, we've got a special guest this week. You know him very well. It's Kevin Burkhardt. He's a sportscaster, of course, for Fox Sports. He's the lead NFL play-by-play announcer, MLB studio host. Kevin, psyched to have you on the show. How you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm excited to be with you guys. Jason, nice to meet you. And Alex, we've known each other a long time. It's actually crazy when you think how long we've been together. It feels like it was yesterday. So I'm just thrilled to be here, guys.
That's where I want to start, actually. I'm glad you went there because I want to ask you, and then I'm going to ask Alex the same question. Like, do you remember the first time you met and when you started working together?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm not counting the times like we met when he was playing. I'm just talking, television stuff. Yeah, I remember the first time we met for sure, because before he started, we talked and Alex reached out to me and said, hey, any chance we could go in earlier and just kind of go over some basics of television and I was like, sure.
He's being very humble because I actually said, do you mind coming into the studio with me and actually doing like a dry rehearsal? And he did a double take. He's like, really? What? Of course. Yeah, I'll come in. So on his day off, so generous, he comes in. We literally are sitting in his chair and I'm sitting on my chair, except my knees were trembling. And I think he felt my energy. And I was really nervous because I'm one that likes to be prepared. And we went through it. And he's taught me so much about the business, Jason, even as far as like we were doing a game with the Mets and Jose Reyes got a big hit. And he kind of hit his mute button and said, let's lay out here. And I said, Kevin, what's laying out mean? Right? I'm just a baseball player. I'm not a broadcaster. And he says, like, that just means we lay out. We can't do anything better than the moment, the sound of the game, the sound of the crowd. And I'm like, oh, yeah, that's kind of cool. That makes a lot of sense. And so many little things like that. I remember a few weeks ago at the All-Star game, I wanted to land a point about the Yankees. And he actually helped me kind of have my first sentence. So what Kevin does, both what he's going to do for Tom Brady and what he's done for myself, Derek Jeter, and Big Papi, I can't even describe it because he's great at what he does. He might be even a better leader in that clubhouse for us.
Appreciate that, brother.
So how do you develop that skill, Kevin? Is this something that you felt like you had from the beginning, or is it a matter of reps? Because like sort of tending to these guys is a very specific skill.
Well, I think, I'll use Alex's references, right? I mean, I think the role of a host should be point guard or quarterback, however you want to look at it, right? You want to distribute the ball. I mean, the reality is no one cares what I think. I mean, I have 3 of the all-time players ever in the sport sitting next to me. What are they going to care what I have to say? So, whether I'm doing studio with, Alex and the crew or whether I'm doing play-by-play, and I've had multiple partners, in the play-by-play booth in my career. And, this year it'll be Tom Brady. And, my goal is to make the analysts be comfortable and look and feel good. Like that's the whole goal of my role. And I enjoy that role. Like, yeah, I'm totally content throwing up the lob and having someone reverse dunk it. I think to me, that's a great day. So the biggest thing is always, Jason, it's trust, right? In this industry, especially, it's trust. And so I want whoever I'm working with to understand that I've got their back and I'm not going to let them fall. And, if they forget something, I'll pick them up. And also knowing that I have their best interest. I'm not going to intentionally lead them into a bad spot. So I think that's always the mindset, and then you get past that and, you get comfortable and then you start busting chops and then it's just like old friends hanging out. So I don't know. I just think to be in this role, I think you have to have some level of unselfishness, and hopefully I have that. I've had that for my partners.
So before we get too far away from it, I do want to make one sort of historical note, which is before you guys were in the booth together, you called Alex's last game, right? The last time he trots off the field. What do you remember like about that? And then I'm going to flip it to Alex as well.
Yeah, I mean, it was an honor. And, Eric Shanks, our CEO and president at Fox, said, hey, KB, you're going to go call Alex's last game. I was like, great. So I just remember it was cool, texting Alex was going to do it. And then being there in the hall, I saw him, in the tunnel and just gave him a hug. And he was so supportive. Like, I'm so glad you're here doing this. And, it made me feel good. And just the whole night, honestly, one of the big things I remember is I felt so terrible for him because we're there. We have this whole pregame show and we have the whole ceremony. And then it starts downpouring like as he brings his family out of the field. I'm like, come on, wait a little bit longer. So we had a little bit of a rain delay. But I just think I felt honored and it was enjoyable. The fact that, in my crazy head, it was like, okay, kind of helping transition him from the field to us, So that's the way I looked at it. It was cool to be a part of.
Because you had done your deal. Before that game, you knew you were going to work together.
Yeah, because the prior year, we did the World Series while I was playing, which was an incredible training grounds for me, actually, and helped me understand the media a lot more. I've often told people that I wish I did an intern with Fox when I was, a teenager, because it really helped me understand that there's a lot of good people in media, that they have a job to do, that their job is not to just go get you. Their job is to tell a story. And if you can help them tell that story, it could be more of a win-win situation. So the year before we had done the World Series with the Mets, Kansas City, we were already friends. We're obviously much, much better friends today. But I felt really honored and grateful and happy that it was Kevin's voice that one day I can share it with my kids or my great-grandkids. If you think about the Gibson home run by Vince Scully or a lot of the big moments, touch 'em all, Joe, we have all these moments that connect the great moments, the great players with the great voices. And in our generation, it's been Bob Costas, it's been Vince Scully, it's been Harry Carey. In this next generation, I believe Kevin Burkhardt is going to have a big dent in American sports history, obviously with Super Bowls and World Series and all these things. So I was very happy.
All right. So Alex teed it up perfectly. He's learning from you, KB. This is great. You know, he's like leading into the next subject seamlessly.
He's a pro now. Come on.
I know, exactly.
He's long been a pro.
Now the new guys come in and he's like, come here. Derek, come on. Let me tell you how this goes.
Oh, yeah.
So how did you get into this business? I mean, you were working at a car dealership at some point. Like, how does this all happen?
Well, I always wanted to do it because I really wasn't very good at playing anything as much as I love sports. So I was like, okay, how can I be involved in something that I love? And so really as a kid, I wanted to be an announcer. You know, I had so many idols and I just always loved the art of calling a game and, you know, listen to everything I could, listen to sports radio and pre and post game shows and all that. I was just so into it. So longer story short, you know, I would practice on Nintendo games as a kid. I would play games and I would announce them into a tape recorder. That's how I got, I guess, my start, how I practiced. And I did it with like my best friend and my brother. And we would just sit there into a tape recorder and call the play-by-play and play the video game. And it actually was good practice. And so did that. And then in high school, we had like a one camera situation. We went to the football games and announced on like a local cable access. And then I took it to college and I was serious about it. And we had a good program at William Patterson where, you know, we did a lot of games and learned how to do games and what a television broadcast was all about. And then just, you know, kind of a winding path, Jason, right? Like I have a fun journey. As you mentioned, I kind of quit to sell cars for a while because I was frustrated. And it ended up being one of the best things I ever did. So, yeah, you know, from selling Chevy Tahoes to calling Super Bowls in the World Series, who knew, right? Just wild.
Yeah. So, Kevin, talking about inspiration, before you came on, I was telling Jason that some of my inspirational people were Magic Johnson, a man of color that was great in sports, and then, you know, parlay that to a great business. Obviously, Keith Hernandez, Strawberry, Doc, those are my guys growing up. Who were some of the voices that really inspired you?
I think the answer to that question is there's a lot, right? Kind of like you, Alex, you have a few different ones and for different reasons. I think in terms of actual announcers, I had a lot of different ones. I mean, for football, it was always Summerall and Madden. And I got the chills when they came on because it just signified a big game. And even to this day, I'm always like thinking like, okay, what would Pat Summerall do in this situation? I just admired him. And so I love that. And they were big in our house. You know, our household, we grew up Mets fans. And so Bob Murphy and Ralph Kiner and, you know, a little later, Gary Cohen, who I got to work with, who's still doing the Mets and who's just fantastic. And we've become close friends over the years. I just tried to pay attention, Al, and just realize, okay, like what kind of styles or what, who does this differently and what I liked, and then kind of try to form some version of me out of all that without, you know, not copying, but just kind of taking bits and pieces I liked and trying to find my own style, I think.
I often get asked, what's been the biggest jump in your career? And everyone thinks is like, you know, the big leagues, right? And for me, it was from A ball to AA, because I thought AA, you have the best arms. They're effectively wild. You don't know if it's going to be a strike on the corner or someone's going to throw one at your head. And that's usually where our best prospects went. And I thought the jump to the big leagues was the easiest because you had better stadiums, pitchers threw better control. They were more in the zone. Umpires called better strikes, but the lights were really a big difference because you see the ball better. I'm going to ask you the same question. Like, you covered the Mets, you covered the Jets. Is it going to Fox, or is it going from tier 2 NFL coverage to the top team now with Tom Brady and Greg Olson in the past? What's been the biggest jump and why for you?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think your analogy is similar. Look, I'm not going to say that going to Fox on a national gig wasn't a big jump, but I think I kind of agree with you. And I feel like I was ready for it. Like, it wasn't like I was going into it and nervous or didn't think I could handle it. You know, and I was older. I didn't get a break when I was 25 years old. I mean, I'm 50 years old now. This will be my 12th year at Fox. So I was comfortable with who I was at that time. And I was not nervous about it at all, even though it was a big career jump, obviously. You know, I started out doing high school sports, and then, you know, I was doing minor league baseball Alex, for, $25 a game, and you're going to these random places with 10 people in the stands, and you're doing a game by yourself. Like I had a couple games that, like everybody in my position that's done this, right? You're doing these games by yourself and you're going extra innings. It's a 5-hour game and you haven't peed in 7 hours and you're just trying to survive, man. It's crazy. So I think going from that, and, it wasn't like the next day, but going from that and then, kind of jumping into my first foray into New York, which was WCBS radio. That was the biggest deal, because I went from doing minor league baseball that nobody listened to by myself, on these random radio stations, to WCBS AM in New York, which that was a big jump. And that was like, oh, okay, this is a little different here. But at the same time, I always felt like if I could handle that, doing 5 hours of radio by myself, I felt like I could handle it. But I think just in terms of class, I think that was probably the biggest leap. Going from, minor league ball to New York is pretty big.
And so along the way, Kevin, like you're having to make decisions about your career. You're having to negotiate. This show is called The Deal after all. Like, how did you handle your various deals? What were the negotiations like? How do you approach that? Because as Alex likes to say on this show, there are a lot of people out there listening who are doing whatever the 2024 version of what you did is, calling games into their phone or, watching the sound down as you guys do your thing. How would you advise them, or what did you learn about sort of negotiating for yourself? And what do you remember about those talks?
The biggest thing about negotiating, I actually learned when I sold cars. That's why it was the most important thing that I ever did, because I like to think of myself as a pretty easygoing guy, and I'm usually not a rock the boat guy unless I get to the point where I'm really angry, which doesn't happen very often. And so I think I was apprehensive, maybe even afraid to ask for things that I wanted. I was afraid of hearing the word no. And when you sold cars, you either asked for what you wanted or you didn't eat. That's the bottom line, right? And so I got this great lesson, when I sold cars from our general manager, who became a great friend and a great enabler to help me get back in the industry, actually. He just was like, listen, you have to go out and find out what the customers want, but then ask for what you want. Otherwise, you're not going to get any deals. Like, that's the way it works. And so I worked on negotiating, and really I just worked on asking for, what was right. And I wasn't the best salesman in the place, but I had the top customer service in the place. And I learned how to negotiate. And I had never had that skill before. And so after that, I just said to myself, in this industry, no matter what happens, I'm going to ask for what I want. And if it don't get it, that's fine. But I'm not going to go down and be like, I regret that I didn't ask for this, or I regret that I didn't inquire about this. And so that's what I did. And honestly, when I was trying to get into, the next step, I called a friend of mine at WFAN, contacted him, who actually was a boss at one point, Eric Spitz. And he was the program director there at the time. And I said, Eric, listen, I think I'm good enough to work at the Fan. Like, I would love to come in and audition for you. And he said, okay, how about Friday? And I was like, wait, what? It was really the first time after selling cars that I asked for something that I wanted. And it was just a great lesson. And then I think from then it's just, I think there's a fine line, especially in this business, of not being a pain in the butt too. Like, you don't want to annoy people. You don't want to be that person where you're a diva. But I think if you don't have a goal and ask for things you want and request things you want, well, you're never going to get it. So that's been my personal life lesson.
KB, I love that concept about asking for what you want. A little bit about that process. I mean, what kind of metrics are you looking at? Are you looking at, well, the NFL package is $110 billion over 11 years. Is it you looking at your contemporaries and say, hey, I'm just as good as that guy. What can I make similar? Walk me a little bit through that process on how you talk about it, maybe with your wife, or maybe how you talk about it with your agent, or at least just internally.
I think there's two things to it. So I certainly know my worth and I know what my talent is. I think you could get in trouble to a degree in comparing yourself to others. Like, I always felt like, oh, he's making this and she's making that. And if I'm not making this, I'm pissed off. Well, I just don't think that's the way to go. I think the difference for me is knowing what my value is and knowing what my worth is, and conveying that, to my agent, and then, having goals and setting my goals. Like, I'm also a guy that I think there are deals to be had, right? Whether I'm, signing a contract with Fox or whether I'm buying a new refrigerator, I feel like there's a deal to be had, right? That probably makes both parties happy. And so that is usually my approach. Yes, I'll look at others to see the market. I'm not saying that we don't. I'm not saying my agent doesn't, but I'm not a guy that takes my contract and puts it up against the wall against somebody else. I just feel like that's a recipe for disaster, for me personally, anyway.
Let's talk about sort of where we are in this landscape, because you mentioned you're 50 years old. We're all about the same age. We have seen one of the biggest upheavals in the world of media, certainly in our lifetimes. And yet, everyone will tell you, whether it's, your boss at Fox, whether it's Jimmy Pitaro at ESPN, whether it's my bosses at Bloomberg, live sports are one of the most valuable assets out there. With all this turmoil that has gone on, or at least all this change, does it affect how you think about doing your job? Not even just as it relates to contracts, but more, does it change the way you approach it, knowing that the media landscape is so different?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very lucky and fortunate that I'm in the live sports space. I think live sports and live news, no matter how much change we are enduring and probably will endure for the next, 2, 3, 5, 10 years, I just don't see that changing. And so I think it's a great space to be. Now, that being said, I have a lot of friends who are on, the regional levels, and there's been so much upheaval in that time, in that space. How do you navigate it? I've been asked for advice, and honestly, it's really hard to give because I feel like every 6 months it changes, where friends don't even know where the next paycheck's coming from. Is it coming from a team? Is it coming from a league? Is it coming from a network, a streamer? So I think it's a very rocky time in terms of that. I'm fortunate to be on a national level, and it's a little bit different, and I know I'm fortunate. But I do think that just overall, it will settle and find itself, that I just can't see a way that live sports and live news is not the most important thing. No matter how much streaming, no matter how much the industry changes, whether we're packaging things together, whether we have cable or whether we cut the cord, those things are what people want to watch. There's always going to be a demand for it. And just look at the ratings. They tell you that's the case.
Sort of pivoting a little bit to sort of your day-to-day, obviously it's baseball season as we speak, but very soon it will be football season. It always sneaks up on you. How do you juggle it? How do you think about it in your mind? You've got to be hyper prepared on arguably the two most popular sports. Alex is involved in one of the three most popular as an owner, but how do you juggle that, and how do you stay current and keep your mind right, I guess?
I always look at it, Jason, like a midterm. I think that the game or the show, whatever we're doing, is the test. And if you study for the test, you feel pretty darn good going into it. It's not going to say it's going to be perfect and you're going to get 100 every time, but you feel good going in and you feel like you can adapt to things that happen in front of you because you're prepared. And the simple answer, without breaking down my exact routine every day, is I just read and watch a lot. I read and watch a lot. I don't think there's any substitute for that. And then I take a lot of notes. I have my own database that I have on my laptop that I take notes in there, and I save and I go back and reference and my own thoughts in there. That's the most simplistic way I could answer it. I don't know a shortcut. I just don't know a shortcut how you can possibly do this job without being on top of all that.
I think, Kevin, our listeners are probably intrigued. I certainly am, and I know Jason is too. There's so much information. We're in the generation of data crazy, right? It just comes at you from every angle. What are some of the publications you read, and what do you listen to in preparation to be up to date?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think for the most part, Alex, I try to read everything. There's so much out there, right? So, I'll have my favorites. I really enjoy for sports. I enjoy The Athletic a lot. I think it's a great site because they have some in-depth articles that give you some perspective and human nature a little bit that's in there. I really like that. So I'm not a big stat guy. I like it for context, but I'm not in my broadcasting. I'm not a guy that recites stats off the top of my head. That I just not the way it's not how I believe it should be done. And, again, we're in a stylistic business. Everybody's different. And my brain also doesn't work like that. I have a creative brain. So I am not a guy that could see a spreadsheet and go boom, 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 boom. I'm a guy that give me a blank canvas and I'll fill it in. So the way I study is also different. I read everything I can get my hands on. I watch everything I can get my hands on. And I try not to get too deep into the woods of some of the number stuff and getting lost in there. I'm looking really just for context because I think it's all about this, Al. And you know this. We sit next to each other all the time. But our audience could be a diehard fan who knows everything about the team for the last 45 years, a pretty big fan who watches a lot and knows enough, a casual fan who will flip it on, once every 2 weeks, or someone who has never seen a game all year or in their lifetime. Like doing the Super Bowl especially, we have people who never watch football. So how do you talk to all of those same people at the same time? I think that's the key. So finding the information there and finding the right way to have it presented where you're not offending the people who are diehards, but also making it understandable for the people who really don't know exactly what they're watching. That's what I'm trying to do. That's
an interesting segue into a question I know we both want to ask you, which is about the state of baseball, because it feels like the story of baseball is trending upward right now. Part of it, I think, Alex, I've talked about this on this show. You've got the sort of big brand name teams doing well. That always breeds a certain amount of excitement, when the Dodgers and the Yankees and others are doing quite well. It also feels like these rule changes, everybody's like, yeah, speeding up the game is really smart. Yeah. And Alex and I have talked about this, even taking my family to a game, it's so much more enjoyable, to go down to Yankee Stadium, A, when they're winning, but B, also when you're not going to be there for 4.5 hours, with apologies to Yankee Stadium. But how does it feel to you, knowing the game as well as you do, sitting alongside Alex and Big Papi and Derek and sort of taking this all in? How does baseball feel to you right now?
It feels better. It feels better, no question. I think a lot of the rules changes that they made were a success. I mean, I think the game did need to speed up, and I think that it certainly achieved that, right? And you're right. It does make a difference when you're watching. I think they've involved the base running more with what they did to the bases with the stolen base game, going first to third. I think that part's been great.
Tapping into your creative side, if you were the commissioner for 24 hours, what are be 2 or 3 changes that you would make to continue to grow the game?
Well, I do think that they have to continue to work to market people and market players more, Alex, because as you well know, you could sit down and you're an owner, but you could sit down and most people could sit down and you could present, I don't know, let's say 25 NBA players in front of them. Let's say the top 25 NBA players. You could put them on a piece of paper and you could take an average fan and they would name every single one of them. Top 25 NFL players. Easy. Everyone would be able to name them. Top 25 Major League Baseball players, if you did the same thing, would people be able to name who they are?
No way.
I'm not sure they would.
Not close.
I think that's something that's got to change. I think it's got to be more accessible. Like, we're trying. And I know, we had the All-Star game a couple of weeks ago and, Fox is miking all these guys and it's great. You're getting to see their personality. But I think the point is when you watch the NBA Finals and Jason Tatum is interviewing in the middle of the game, and baseball has been averse to that. Well, there's a reason why that's a good thing, because people understand who these players are. They get to know them. They feel connected to them. And without that, it hurts the game. So I think you need the connectivity to the game there for sure. And then I get why we've gotten to where we've gotten with the lack of action, with the 3 true outcomes, which is homer, walk, strikeout. I understand it's because what the numbers have said, and we're following the math, which I get. But I would find some way to penalize a strikeout more than just it's an out. There needs to be some way, and I'm not sure just off the top of my head answering your question what it would be, but the strikeout has become all too commonplace. When you played, you've told me this, you were embarrassed to strike out. You talked to all the greats, they were embarrassed to strike out. Doesn't matter anymore. And I think we've got to find a way to make that a penalty to increase contact.
All right, so we do have to talk football for just a second, in part because this is going to be a very big fall for us as viewers and for you in the booth working with Tom Brady. It's probably the most heralded arrival of a commentator that we've seen in quite some time. Not since Alex Rodriguez took the booth have we seen such anticipation. How do you prep for something like that? Or is it just sort of business as usual for you?
I prep it's slightly anticipated, it's the greatest football player ever. But I prep the same way that I prep with anybody. I've had multiple partners in different sports, and I always feel like it starts with building trust and building chemistry. So the first thing that Tom and I did was simply get to know each other, spend time together, go to dinner, go golfing, that type of thing. And then you build it all from there. That's where the trust comes from. And that's also where I understand how he works and how he thinks. That doesn't matter who you are. And then, Jason, we've had, a bunch of practices and talks and rehearsals, and it's just You want to get to the point where I don't even have to look at him anymore. I understand like exactly where he's going. Like I've worked with Alex long enough. I know exactly what he wants to do. And I generally know like what he feels about something. And that's simply time on task for the most part, right? And that's my job. You know, my actual play-by-play chops are not going to change. I'm going to call the game the way I always call the game. Now it's just incorporating him the way he's most comfortable. And that part changes depending on the analyst. I've had, different analysts with completely different styles in my time, even at Fox. And I enjoy that process. I like it.
Kev, I'm wondering, you did your first Super Bowl. You're about to do your second one, this time with Tom Brady. You were fantastic in the first one.
Thanks, man.
I'm wondering how you think about performing and being the voice to almost 150 million people here. Do you have to be careful with the temptation of overloading your preparation versus a first game that you're doing early in the season? What lessons did you learn from the first Super Bowl that you're going to take and apply to this Super Bowl?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I had no idea what to expect. And, I talked to a lot of people, getting advice, and I had a good approach. I did a ton of my prep the week before because there's a 2-week break. So the week before I did a ton of prep as if the game was on the first Sunday, and I could have done the game that Sunday, which is what I wanted to do. Because then Monday we leave for the Super Bowl and we've got all kinds of commitments and media and different meetings and different things that go on through the week. And so I kind of was prepared for that, but it doesn't really prepare you for it. I imagine it's like, you prepare, your whole career for trying to win a World Series, but then when you're at bat in game 7, it's still overwhelming, right? Mm-hmm. So that week, it was just so much. I was just anxious to get to the game, worried about staying healthy and making sure like I had my voice. And, it's obviously the biggest day of my career. So you just want to get there. And then when I woke up Sunday morning, I just felt normal because I was like, oh, I can do this. I know how to do games. And it really didn't bother me Sunday at all. I embraced it. And I told myself that too. I said, hey, if you don't have fun doing this, then you're never going to have fun, right? This is what you dreamed of as a kid. And so truly Sunday, I had the best time. So whether it's 200 people watching or 120 million people watching, I don't really, that part doesn't bother me. That part's never bothered me. But until you actually go through it, you just can't fully comprehend like how many ways you get pulled that particular week.
Yeah. All right, so it's time for the lightning round. So this is where Alex and I ask you a number of questions. We want to hear your quick responses just off the top of your head. Okay. So are you ready for this?
Let's go, Jason.
All right. What's the best piece of advice you've ever been given on deal making or business?
Just trust yourself, be you, and it'll work itself out. And that kind of lets everybody kind of calm down. And I've gone by that.
What's the worst advice you've ever been given?
In regards to deals or anything at all?
Yeah, you call it.
I was told that I didn't have the skill to be a play-by-play guy.
Wow.
So that has been motivating my entire career. I've used that one as fuel.
So you've worked with Alex, Derek, Big Papi. You've worked with any number of analysts. You're about to work with Tom Brady. Aside from those guys, who's your dream partner? You can take it from any moment in history. If you could just like snap your fingers, who'd you be in the booth with?
Wow. I mean, look, I'll give you two answers. Try and keep it quick. I can name a million people. I mean, but for one, it would be John Madden, just because I grew up idolizing the guy, and that would be so fun to sit next to him while he was doing his thing. And then, I'm so lucky to work with who I work with, but it would be cool to do a show with Charles Barkley. I think he's the best. I've only met him one time. But yeah, I think that would be a hell of a lot of fun. I think he fits in with a lot of the stuff that we do.
What's your hype song before a big game on TV?
Oh, Al, here we go. I'm going to tell you, I got to go back to my roots. I'm a Jersey kid. So if you're giving me like one song to play, I'm going to pump on a little Bon Jovi, like Living on a Prayer. That's where I'm going to go.
Oh, nice.
That's amazing.
Love it.
You can take the boy out of Jersey.
Some things don't ever change.
All right. So finally, what's your advice for non-athletes or, aspiring people who want to work in the sports world?
This is what I truly believe in. It's two simple things. It's follow your dreams, because you're going to regret if you don't. Right. And you don't know where it's going to end up. But I always say that's so important, because dreams get squashed and they don't ever really follow through on what they want to do. And then the other thing is, I think, set goals, but I'm just not a believer in saying, where do you want to be in 10 years? I want to do the World Series in 10 years. And the reason I don't believe that is because I feel like if you do that and you're not there, then you look at yourself as a failure. So the goals that I like to set are improvements, things that make you better. How can you be better? How can you improve your life, improve your career? I don't like to say, in 5 years, I'm going to be making X, because I feel like if you're not, it's a failure. That's at least from my personality. So I always find when I talk to students and like, well, I want to call the Super Bowl too, and I hope to be there by 30. Well, let's just put something on the table that's achievable. And then when you get there, you check it off and now you're on to the next goal. That's the way I view goals. That's what I tell young people. Whether it's right, I have no idea, but that's how I feel.
Well, it seems to have worked very well for you. You're a good partner to my partner. This has been fun to sort of compare notes. We're going to have maybe have like a session, just the two of us, about Alex when he's not there. But you've been very kind with your time, and everything that Alex has said about you is true. You're clearly a great and thoughtful guy. So we really appreciate you doing this, Kevin.
Kevin, thank you so much. This has been so much fun, brother, and I'll see you soon.
The Deal is hosted by Alex Rodriguez and me, Jason Kelly. This episode was made by Stacey Wong, Anna Mazarakis, Lizzie Phillip, and Victor Iveas. Our theme music was made by Blake Maples. Our executive producers are Kelly LaFerriere, Ashley Honig, and Brendan Newnham. Sage Bauman is the head of Bloomberg Podcasts. Additional support from Rachel Scaramuzzino and Elena Sausangelis. Thanks for listening to The Deal. If you have a minute, please subscribe, rate, and review our show. It'll help other listeners find us. And remember, if you're a Bloomberg subscriber, you can listen to all of our episodes absolutely ad-free on Apple Podcasts. All you need to do is find the Bloomberg channel and connect your Bloomberg account. I'm Jason Kelly. See you next week.